You know that feeling when you're in a debate and it's just going in circles, where nobody can actually prove anything? Well, in the early 20th century, a group of philosophers felt that way about, well, pretty much all of philosophy. So they came up with this radical idea, a kind of weapon designed to end pointless arguments forever. And they did it by asking one simple question: what actually makes a statement meaningful? All right, let's dive into this.
I mean, think about a statement like God exists. Is that a claim about reality, the same way the sky is blue is? Or is it more like shouting ouch when you get hurt? Just an expression of a feeling. This is the exact question a group called the Logical Positivists set out to answer. And their solution? Well, it was going to shake the very foundations of philosophy, ethics, and religion.
So to really get their radical solution, we first have to understand the problem they were staring down. For them, philosophy was just stuck. It was bogged down in a major rut, completely locked in what they saw as an endless and, honestly, a totally unfruitful debate.
So you had these two camps. On one side, you've got the empiricists. They're all about if you can't see it, hear it, or touch it, it's not real knowledge. Everything comes from our senses. But on the other side, you had the rationalists, and they claimed they could figure out deep truths about reality just by thinking, using something they called a priori intellectual intuition. It was a complete and total deadlock.
And this is where the philosopher A.J. Ayer steps in. He was just so frustrated by this whole stalemate. He pointed out that an empiricist can't use their sense experience to prove that a rationalist's intuition is wrong. It's kind of like trying to measure a dream with a ruler. It just doesn't work. Ayer knew they needed a totally new approach. It wasn't about winning the game. It was about changing the rules entirely.
And this is what led Ayer and his buddies in the Vienna Circle to cook up their new weapon. It's a tool they designed to just slice through all the philosophical noise and basically act as a bouncer at the door of meaning itself. They called it the verification principle.
The whole thing is built on this really crucial distinction. See, when you say the table is wood, you're expressing a belief about the world. That's what they called cognitive language. But when you stub your toe and yell, ouch, you're not stating a fact, you're just expressing a feeling. That's non-cognitive. The logical positivists basically said that for any statement to be factually meaningful, it had to be cognitive, period.
Ayer let it out really simply. He argued that a statement is only meaningful if you know how you could, at least in theory, check if it's true or false using your senses. If you can't even describe an observation that would prove or disprove it, then you're not actually saying anything about the world. You're just making noise.
So here's the bottom line. They created two, and only two paths to meaning. Path number one, is the statement true just by definition? Like all bachelors are unmarried. That's called an analytic statement. And yep, it's meaningful. Path number two, can the statement be tested by experience, even if just in principle? That's a verifiable statement. If your statement doesn't fit into one of those two boxes, well, it gets tossed out. And the fallout from this was absolutely breathtaking. All those centuries of deep debate about God, the nature of reality, ethics, what is beauty. According to the verification principle, all of it wasn't just wrong. It was worse. It was literally meaningless noise. Just a really sophisticated way of saying boo or hooray.
Now, obviously, an idea this revolutionary wasn't going to go unchallenged. The rest of the philosophical world wasn't just going to pack up and agree that their life's work was gibberish. Oh no. The critics were about to strike back, and they struck hard.
The attacks really came from three main directions. First, people argued the principle was just way too restrictive. Second, a philosopher named John Hick found this really clever loophole that had to do with the afterlife. And third, and this was the real killer, the principles seemed to destroy itself.
Okay, so let's take that first problem. Think about a historical statement, like Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. We can't hop in a time machine and go watch him do it, right? We can't directly verify it with our senses. So according to the strict rules of the principle, does that make all of history meaningless? I mean, that just sounds absurd. Then you've got John Hick's brilliant countermove. He tells this little story, a parable, about two people walking down a long road. One of them is convinced it leads to a beautiful celestial city. The other thinks it leads absolutely nowhere. Now, they can't know for sure while they're on the journey, but as Hick puts it, when they get to the end of the road, one of them is going to be proven right. What Hick was doing was so clever. He was using Ayer's own logic against him. See, Ayer had already said a statement is meaningful if it's verifiable in principle. His example was something like, there are mountains on the dark side of the moon. Back then, we couldn't see them, but we knew we could check one day. Hick just said, okay, religious claims are exactly like that. We can verify them after we die. He called this eschatological verification. Pretty smart.
But here it is, the knockout punch. What happens if we apply the verification principle to itself? Think about the rule. A statement is only meaningful if it's analytic or empirically verifiable. Okay, let's test that statement. Is it analytic? Is it true by definition? Nope, you can deny it without contradicting yourself. So can you verify it with your senses? Can you go out and find a verification principle under a rock? Of course not. It's a rule about language. Which means, by its own logic, the verification principle is itself meaningless. Ouch.
Now, faced with these absolutely devastating attacks, you'd think Ayer would just throw in the towel. But he didn't. He was a brilliant thinker, and he actually spent years trying to tweak and adapt his principle to survive this onslaught of criticism.
So first, to try and save history, he came up with this idea of weak verification, basically saying a statement is meaningful if observations can just make it probable. But that kind of opened the door for religious claims to sneak back in. So then he tried to tighten the rules again, talking about direct versus indirect verification. But that self-destruction problem, it just wouldn't go away, which forced him into one last very clever retreat.
In the end, Ayer basically had to make a huge concession. He admitted the principle wasn't some grand statement of fact about how the world works. Instead, he started calling it a methodological stipulation. He was essentially saying, look, this isn't a universal truth. It's just a tool. It's the definition of meaning you choose to adopt if you're already an empiricist to begin with.
So after all that, what's the final verdict on Ayer's big project? Did it actually work? And what is the real legacy of this huge intellectual battle over the nature of meaning itself?
Well, as a weapon to completely wipe out metaphysics for good, the verification principle, frankly, failed. It just couldn't stand up to its own logic. But here's the thing. In failing, it actually achieved something pretty remarkable. It forced philosophers to get way more serious about what separates a useful argument from a pointless one. It made everyone focus intensely on that connection between our language, our evidence, and the claims we're making about reality. And that really leaves us with a fascinating, kind of mind-bending question. The verification principle was this bold attempt to draw a sharp line in the sand between sense and nonsense. But if the very rule you're using to draw that line ends up on the nonsense side of it, it really forces you to ask, where do we actually find meaning, and who gets to decide what counts?